HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Transforming Harry, the adaptation of Harry Potter in the Transmedia Age, edited by John Alberti and P. Andrew Miller, read by Shaun Grindell and Esther Wane. Introduction. Harry Potter and the Magical Screen. John Alberti and P. Andrew Miller. The 8 film versions of the 7 Harry Potter novels represent an unprecedented cultural event in the history of cinematic adaptation. The essays in Transforming Harry, the adaptation of Harry Potter in the Transmedia Age, explore the culture, political, aesthetic, and pedagogical dimensions of this generation-defining event, as a means of considering what the process of cinematic adaptation in the digital age tells us about popular culture in the 21st century. The movie version of the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, premiered in 2001, in between publication of the 4th and 5th books of this global literary phenomenon. As a result, the production and reception of both novel and movie series became intertwined with one another, creating multiple combinations of fans who accessed the series first through the books, first through the movies, and in various other combinations. The decision to cast 3 young age-appropriate actors, who would mature along with their fictional counterparts, further represented a cross-pollination of the interpretive process, as readers began experiencing the newly emerging novels in terms of the visual imagination of their screen experiences. At the same time, the adaptation, reception, and transformation of the Harry Potter narrative took place as digital technologies and the Internet were radically redefining all aspects of the media landscape, from the production and distribution of visual narratives to the very relationship between readers, viewers, and cultural texts. As the boundaries between the producers and consumers of books and movies began to blur and fade, the process of adaptation began to include fan-based texts such as fan fiction and fan sites, mashups, GIFs, and other forms of prosumer activity. Nowhere more so than in the fan culture that developed around the Harry Potter series on screens of various kinds. The digital age has also raised our critical awareness of just how complex a cultural apparatus is contained within the seemingly simple term, the movies. More and more we recognize how the cinematic experience is, and really always has been, a radically multi-screen experience. Rather than relying on the textual stability evoked by the idea of the movie version of a novel, we want to explore how the mobility and interactivity of digital information challenges our basic definition of what a movie is. Just as significant for adaptation studies, a similar revolution is underway in literary studies, as we likewise come to appreciate how the reading experience is equally a multi-screen, interactive experience, taking place on tablets and smartphones, with the printed page now just one more opaque and flammable screen. The case of the Harry Potter series spans all of these screens in ways that are both unprecedented in the history of cinematic adaptation and that speak directly to how the digital age radically challenges and expands our ideas about adaptation. The stories combine an atavistic nostalgia for a supposedly simpler era of media production, where characters use quill pens to write on parchment by firelight within the Gothic castle school Hogwarts, with themes of transformation, adaptation, and the magical impermanence of the material world. Even though the plot of the novels spans the years from 1992 to 1998, with an epilogue set in 2017, the emerging digital world scarcely makes an appearance in the series, either in print or on screen. The Muggle technology that so fascinates the pure-blood wizards remains for the most part stubbornly analog, from landline telephones to broadcast radio and television. The movie versions, however, are themselves epitomes of digital blockbuster visual entertainment, incorporating computer-generated imagery and 3D effects, in part to evoke a sense of the magical world of Harry Potter for its viewers, in part to compete with a constantly evolving and technologized cinematic landscape, dominated by adaptations of equally fantastic comic book universes. But the adaptation of Harry Potter is not limited to movies based on the 7 canonical novels. The larger culture of Harry Potter adaptation and reception itself exemplifies textuality in the digital age, encompassing a vast fan fiction community, an endless morphing variety of mashups and visual play, as represented by Catherine McCain's essay on gift sets, and a continuing development of new Potter material by J.K. Rowling through the Pottermore website, itself both an original Potter text and an extensive adaptation of Potterism, as well as her prominent Twitter presence, the new movie series, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, a once ancillary Potter text now become part of the canon, and the 2-part play The Cursed Child, focused on the children of the original Potter characters. In short, as Maria Dicianu argues in her essay, the case of the adaptation of the Harry Potter novels, from the page to the screen, is inseparable from the theoretical arguments over transmedia culture in the digital age, and the extent to which the idea of transmedia either replaces or absorbs more conventional ideas about adaptation. As Henry Jenkins defines it, transmedia storytelling represents a process where integral elements of a fiction get dispersed systematically across multiple delivery channels for the purpose of creating a unified and coordinated entertainment experience. Ideally, each medium makes its own unique contribution to the unfolding of the story. Again, the case of the Harry Potter series thematizes this debate, as the initial core audience, and arguably most loyal fanbase for the series, remains the so-called millennial generation, whose acculturation into the world of wizards and owls paralleled the need to accommodate to an increasingly participatory and rapidly changing digital culture. Both throwback and throw forward, a textual experience rooted in the old-fashioned pleasures of curling up with a book that has easily encompassed the transmedia manifestations of theme park and video games. The Harry Potter phenomena brings together, as does this collection, more traditional close reading and textual analysis, with theoretical questions about just what we mean by the term adaptation in the digital age. Perhaps the first and most vital question involves the very signifier, Harry Potter itself. Just what do we mean exactly when we refer to Harry Potter? A character in a series of stories? The stories themselves? A complex subculture? A multi-volume series composed of individual novels, Harry Potter shares with other literary and cinematic series the tension between reading these texts as separable units or as part of an overarching whole. That Harry Potter would become a successful multi-volume series was of course no guarantee from the start, and the openings of the first 3 novels in particular employ narrative and cinematic devices of summary and flashbacks that allowed new readers to access the frame story without necessarily having read any of the others. By the last books, however, such aids largely disappeared, and readers are expected to have been keeping up with the series. The same recursive strategy can be seen with the first movie adaptations as well. Both Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Chris Columbus 2001, and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chris Columbus 2002, relied on the repetition in story structure between these 2 novels, each involving Harry arriving at Hogwarts to go on a relatively self-contained quest, to create multiple entry points for beginners to either movie and the series itself. After Alfonso Cuarón's artistically ambitious 3rd movie, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, 2004, however, the movies came increasingly to depend on the prior knowledge of the other movies or novels that audiences would bring with them, an aspect of the movies very different from, say, the venerable James Bond franchise, which resulted in some exasperated reviews by movie critics not versed, or even that interested in the overarching Potter mythology, who nevertheless had to review each movie on the basis of its supposed intrinsic merits as an individual text. The 8 movie adaptations of the 7 Harry Potter novels constitute another unique development in the history of movie adaptation as well, as the appearance of the movies overlapped the composition of the literary texts. When the movie Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone opened, coincidentally but significantly just 2 months after 9/11, only 4 of the novels had appeared. The 5th, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the longest book in the series, and the most overtly political, appeared between the 2nd and 3rd movies. The final novel, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was published in July 2007, the same month as the movie version of Order of the Phoenix, David Yates, and a little over 10 years after the first novel. Just this happenstance of production and marketing itself complicates our understanding of adaptation, as J.K. Rowling's composition of the final Potter books occurred in the context of the cinematic adaptation and reception of her earlier works. Rowling worked closely as a consultant on the movies, even though the screenplays were all written by Steve Kloves, with the exception of Order of the Phoenix, written by Michael Goldenberg. This overlap continued with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, for which Rowling wrote the screenplay, as well as with The Cursed Child, written by Jack Thorne and based on a story by Thorne, Rowling, and play director John Tiffany. And, as with all adaptations, the novel and film series have produced fans who have read only the novels, read both the novels and seen the movies, and have seen only the movies. Yet all 3 groups might unite around the collective signifier, fans of Harry Potter. What many critics saw as the increasingly hermetic nature of the film series, the increasing unwillingness of the later movies to make any allowance for the newbie viewer, represents one crucial aspect of the Harry Potter series as a product of the age of democratized digital reproduction. How technology now allows for the easy multiple viewing of visual narratives on multiple screens. In terms of what we might call textual ontology, digitization erases the material differentiation among media, turning all narratives into code to be translated onto a screen in terms of visual imagery and auditory experiences, whether those images are letters on a Kindle or the multiple frames of a movie. In terms of our practical experience of texts, the cutting-edge technology of digital culture has, ironically, made the old-fashioned book into a dominant reception model in the digital age. If episodic works, such as the Harry Potter film series, or a cable series such as Breaking Bad, are becoming increasingly dense and self-referential in their transmission of narrative information, it is because digitization allows viewers to interact with visual narratives the way they traditionally have with books, watching them over and over, fixating on specific passages, and engaging with and adapting the texts. For contemporary viewers, the atavistic analog distinction between book reading as a domestic, familiar, and repeatable experience, and movie viewing as a fleeting, time-specific event, whether in a theatre or on a pre-digital television schedule, is functionally obsolete. The Harry Potter fans, the movies and the books have always been equally accessible, equally collectible. In terms of implications for adaptation studies, while the cultural distinction between source novel and adapted movie remains a relevant critical orientation for Harry Potter fans, and while the idea and ideal of fidelity also and equally remains an evaluative touchstone for them as well, the digitization of narrative produces a counter-pressure against designating any particular narrative manifestation of Harry Potter as original, primary, or definitive, especially when it comes to the diversity of what we have come to call fan culture. All of these questions surrounding the complexity of the very idea of Harry Potter reflect an ongoing crisis in adaptation theory. As Thomas Leach puts it in his trenchant essay, 12 Fallacies in Contemporary Adaptation Theory, adaptation theory has remained tangential to the thrust of film study, because it has never been undertaken with conviction and theoretical rigor. The center of this crisis remains fixated on the concept of fidelity, even though the demolition of this idea and ideal has become commonplace in discussions of adaptation theory, not the least in Leach's essay, where it stands as fallacy number 8. In place of fidelity, contemporary theorists are proposing new metaphorical models drawn from genetics and information theory, responding both to how the concept of fidelity underestimates the inherent complexity and instability of both written and cinematic texts, and to the ways digital culture is transforming our understanding of textual interconnection itself. Robert Stamm, for example, proposes an intertextual model of adaptation studies, one not oriented by inchoate notions of fidelity, but rather by attention to transfers of creative energy. Even more radically, the cultural theorist Linda Hutcheon and the biologist Gary Bortolotti challenge fidelity discourse in adaptation studies by exploring a homology between biological and cultural notions of adaptation. In this model, sources are rethought as ancestors, and one purpose of critical investigation involves tracing the cultural lineage of a narrative idea through multiple vehicles, in terms of the success of that idea measured by persistence, abundance, and diversity. Harry Potter, in this view, can be thought of as a kind of genotype, a narrative idea that adapts to differing cultural conditions and circumstances. While both Hutcheon and Bortolotti acknowledge that viewers and critics may still make aesthetic judgments about individual expressions or phenotypes of Harry Potter, such as the consensus among many film critics that Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban represents the most aesthetically interesting and satisfying of the Potter movies. The cultural success of Harry Potter as cultural idea is attested to by how well it has thrived in terms of persistence, abundance, and diversity. The homology that Hutcheon and Bortolotti draw between biological and cultural manifestations of adaptation helps us adapt the concept of adaptation to the digital age by recognizing the mutability of individual textual and visual expressions of narrative ideas. But their focus on the metaphor of the phenotype still fixes the text, whether a book, movie, or work of fan fiction, as the source of meaning. The literary theorist N. Catherine Hales, however, draws on information theory to introduce a distinction between information as a thing, as in the idea of the single definable text, and information as an action, rooted in experience, the experience of information. In the choice between what information is and what it does, we can see the rival constellations of homeostasis and reflexivity beginning to take shape. Making information a thing allies it with homeostasis, for so defined, it can be transported into any medium and maintain a stable quantitative value, reinforcing the stability that homeostasis implies. Making information an action links it with reflexivity, for then its effect on the receiver must be taken into account. And measuring this effect sets up the potential for a reflexive spiral through an infinite regress of observers. This perspective explicitly introduces the question of reader-viewer-participant reception into the mix, and points the way forward for our understanding of Harry Potter on the page and on the screen. The Harry Potter phenomenon not only complicates the idea of adaptation in terms of source and derivation, but the persistence, abundance, and diversity of Harry Potter fan culture suggests that reception is adaptation. From this view, interpretation is not a perspective on the text. In a fundamental sense, it is the text, the only text we ever have access to. What digital culture facilitates more than ever before is textual and visual production, motivated by these individual interpretations and adaptations of these texts. It is an axiom now that digital culture and Web 2.0 are radically participatory cultures, and that participation, ranging from comment sections to blogs to mashups, fan fiction and fan videos. These multiple reactions and interpretations and adaptations of these texts function at the same time as both supplements to and constitutive parts of Harry Potter as a narrative idea. The result is a potential revolution in what we mean by reception and adaptation studies, moving beyond questionnaires and focus groups, beyond the idea of reception as commentary on a textual experience. Henry Jenkins' notion of participatory culture in the digital age, an idea built from earlier arguments, carefully made by Janice Radway, Ian Ing, John Fiske and others, that media consumers were more than just passive receivers of ideological content, blurs the lines between reception and interpretation, making every act of reception an act of adaptation, a phenomenon captured in Liza Potts' essay, co-written with her students Emily Dallaire and Kelly Turner, about the culture of fandom, as manifested in a study abroad experience. After all, when we say that a certain cinematic adaptation is unfaithful to the original, we have always meant, whether we knew it or not, that the adaptation was unfaithful to our own interpretation of the original. The development of digital culture has not just meant that we have many more means to express and disseminate our personal interpretations and adaptations. The fact of digital culture, our knowledge and practice of participating in blogs, fan fiction, GIF production, Tumblr pages, mashups, conditions our reading experiences. We read knowing we can respond and adapt in this way. Readers in the age of cinema have long reported fantasizing the movie version of a novel as they read. In fact, this movie adaptation fantasy has perhaps become our default reading experience. In the digital age, this phenomenon has only multiplied in dimension, a version of Muggle magic that may be the most magical and irresistible part of the Harry Potter phenomenon. For the contemporary writer, the digital age and the digital fan culture can be both a boon and a burden. Social media and fan sites can bring attention and success to a series or an author like Rowling. In fact, many publishers now require a web page, blog, social media presence as part of an author's contract. This enables fans to find out more information about their favorite authors, as well as their favorite characters. Rowling particularly uses this to her advantage to engage fans and to add details to the Harry Potter canon. For instance, her statement that the love of Dumbledore's life was Grindelwald was never in the original texts, but once Rowling stated it, it became canon. She is known for engaging her readers through Twitter, answering questions and providing tidbits of Potter lore. When many fans were outraged by the casting of a black actress as Hermione Granger for the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Rowling reminded all with a tweet regarding the first book's initial description of Hermione. Canon, brown eyes, frizzy hair, and very clever. White skin was never specified. Rowling loves Black Hermione. The internet has made the formation of fan cultures easier with fan sites, both official and unofficial. Fan fiction has been around for decades, including the homoerotic category of slash fiction that began with Kirk Spock stories. Before the explosion of fan fiction on the internet, fanzines were a huge part of the fantasy and science fiction community, including award categories in the Hugo Awards. Moving on from the home mimeographed zines of the analog era, fans set up websites and blogs to share reactions, reviews, and fan fiction. However, fan fiction can be problematic for the writer, since it is technically a copyright violation. Successful authors know that fan fiction is being written about their characters and worlds, but usually turn a blind eye towards it. If a fan lets an author know that there is a wonderful fan fiction story up on such a website, the author or publisher may be forced to send a cease and desist order to the webmaster and fans of such a site. Fans are seldom writing fanfic for personal financial gain, but more out of love of the characters and material, or, in some cases, like Kirk Spock, to take control of the narrative. A prime example is the Harry Potter lexicon. Steve Van Der Ark started the website in 1999 because he loved Harry Potter. Rowling had given it a Fan Site Award, and Warner Brothers admitted to using the site for reference as well. However, when he went to publish the encyclopedia with RDR Books in 2007, Rowling and Warner Brothers took him to court and received an injunction against the publication. Rowling argued that the physical publication of the lexicon would harm her eventual plans to do an encyclopedia of her own, while Van der Ark and RDR claimed it fell into public domain. Rowling won the lawsuit, as a judge agreed that the lexicon used her original work without enough added original commentary. Rowling had done much to secure and keep control of fan culture to some degree, especially with Pottermore. She has given an official place for fans to gather and be sorted into their houses. Where many authors have appendices and maps in their books, she has added such things to the Harry Potter world and canon through the Pottermore site, including Ilvermorny, the American wizarding school referenced in her script for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Unlike some other series writers, Rowling does not seem to be tired of her creations yet. L. Frank Baum eventually grew tired of Oz, even sealing it off from our world at one point in the series. However, his readers and publishers wanted more Oz books, and not other stories. Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes, though that didn't let him stop writing stories featuring the detective. For a humorous take on the author that hates his characters, read Sharon McCrumb's Bimbos of the Death Sun. Successful authors often face the problem that fans are fans of a character or series, and not the writer. Writers who do work for hire, writing for franchise TV or movie series, often find that while fans love their series books, those fans seldom cross over to buy the author's original work's stories, as Rowling found out when she wrote her non-Potter books. She also writes under the pseudonym of Robert Galbraith for her Cormoran Strike mystery novels. When she was revealed as the author, sales did take a bump, but the fandom for the series still doesn't match that of Harry Potter. In looking at the Harry Potter phenomena, it is interesting to note not only how effectively the books were adapted into movies, and video games, and theme parks, but how well Rowling has adapted to the digital culture and changing nature of fandom. She has been able to meet the demands of the fans and cause excitement about the series many years after the almost final book came out. As I write this, the two-part play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child has opened to massive box office success. Rowling has said that this is the last we will see of Harry from her. Time will tell. From a creative writing approach, the Harry Potter series and its various adaptations show how the process of adaptation is part of the writing process itself. It is fairly easy to see the influences and sources that Rowling has used and adapted in writing the novels. The hero's journey is central to each novel and the overall story arc. She also adapts various folk and mythic traditions to create her world. For instance, Lupin and the other werewolves transform under the full moon, and can create other werewolves with their bites, but they are certainly vulnerable to magic, and there is no mention of needing silver, which is more of a Hollywood addition anyway. Her centaurs are adapted from the Greek myths, though she chose to make them all more like Chiron, the wise mentor to heroes, than the more common centaur of Greek mythology that pursued drink and women instead of knowledge. Studying the adaptation from book to film, though, can help creative writing students to better understand the difference between plot and story. When looking at the fidelity of the adaptation, many think about fidelity to the plot, down to the last detail and floating ghost. What the writer of the adaptation must do is boil it down to the heart of the story, instead of the details of the plot. The question of what is the story about becomes a question of theme and conflict and character, more than a matter of what happens, and then what happens, and so on. Students realize that plot is still important, and certain elements need to stay, but that capturing the essence of the story is the central idea of adaptation. Structure of the collection. The subtitle of this collection, The Adaptation of Harry Potter in the Transmedia Age, speaks to the multiple interpretive and theoretical implications of the Harry Potter novel and movie series in the digital era.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?